Ranger's Apprentice. Book 1. The Ruins of Gorlan. By John Flanagan. Chapter 26. It was a cold, cheerless camp. Tired from the hard pace they had been keeping up, the Rangers ate a cold meal. Bread, dried fruit and cold meat. Washed down with cold water from their canteens. Will was beginning to hate the sight of the virtually tasteless hard rations they carried. Then Hall took the first watch as Will and Gillan rolled themselves into their cloaks and slept. It wasn't the first rough camp that Will had endured since his training had began. But this was the first time there wasn't the slight comfort of a crackling fire, or at least a bed of warm coals, to sleep by. He slept fitfully. Uncomfortable dreams chasing through his subconscious with fearful creatures, strange and terrifying things that stayed just outside his consciousness, but close enough to the surface that he felt their presence, and was unsettled by them. He was almost glad when Hall shook him gently awake for his watch. The wind was scudding clouds across the moon. The moaning song of the stones was stronger than ever. Will felt a weariness of spirit and wondered if the stones had been designed to wear people down like this. The long grass around them hissed a counterpoint to the far-off keening. Paul pointed to a spot in the heavens, indicating an angle of elevation for Will to remember. When the moon reaches that angle, he told the apprentice, turn over the watch to Gillan. Will nodded, rousing himself and standing to stretch his stiff muscles. He picked up his bow and quiver and walked to the bush Halt had selected as a vantage point. Rangers on watch never stayed in the open by the campsite but always moved away 10 or 20 meters, and found a place of concealment. That way, strangers coming upon the campsite would be less likely to see them. It was one of the many skills Will had learned in his months of training. He took 2 arrows from the quiver and held them between the fingers of his bow hand. He would hold them thus for the 4 hours of his watch. He did this so that there would be no excessive movement. Like taking an arrow from his quiver. A movement that might alert an attacker. Then he flipped the cowl of his cloak over his head so he would merge with the irregular shape of the bush. His head and eyes scanned from side to side as Halt had taught him, changing focus constantly, from close to the campsite and out to the dim horizon around them. That way, his vision would not become fixated on one distance and one area and he'd stand a better chance of seeing movement. From time to time, he turned slowly through a complete circle, scanning the entire ground around them, moving slowly to keep his own movement as imperceptible as possible. The keening of the stones and the hissing of wind through the grass formed a constant background. But he began to hear other noises as well. The rustling of small animals in the grass, and other, less explicable, sounds. With each one, his heart raced a little faster, wondering if this might be the Kalkara creeping in on the sleeping figures of his friends. Once, he was convinced that he could hear the breath of a heavy animal. Fear rose up in him, clutching at his throat, until he realized that with his senses tuned to the utmost degree, he could actually hear his companions breathing quietly in their sleep. He knew that, from any more than 5 meters away, he would be virtually invisible to the human eye, thanks to the cloak, the shadows and the shape of the bush around him. But he wondered if the Kalkara depended on sight alone. Perhaps they had other senses that would tell them that there was an enemy concealed in the bush. Perhaps, even now, they were moving closer, concealed by the long shifting grass, ready to strike. His nerves, already stretched beyond endurance by the stone flute's dismal song, urged him to spin around and identify the source of each new sound as he heard it. But he knew that to do so would be to reveal himself. He forced himself to move slowly, turning carefully until he faced the direction from which he thought the sound had come, assessing each new risk before discarding it. In the long hours of tense watching, he saw nothing but the racing clouds, the fleeting moon and the undulating sea of grass that surrounded them. By the time the moon reached the preordained elevation, he was physically and mentally drained. He woke Gorlan to take over the watch, then rolled back into his cloak again. This time there were no dreams. Exhausted, he slept soundly until the gray light of dawn. By mid-morning, they saw the stone flutes. A gray and surprisingly small circle of granite monoliths that stood at the top of a rise in the plain. Their elected course took the riders a kilometer or so to one side of the stones. Will was content to go no closer to them. The depressing song was now louder than ever, ebbing and flowing on the tide of the wind. "Next flute player I meet," said Gorlan with grim humor, "I'm going to split his lip for him." They rode on, the kilometers passing beneath their horses' hooves, hour after hour, one the same as the next, with nothing new to see and always with the faint hull of the stones at their back. The stones keeping their nerves on edge. The plainsman rose suddenly from the grass some 50 meters away from them. Small, dressed in gray rags and with long hair hanging unkempt to his shoulders, he glared at them through mad eyes for several seconds. Will's heart had barely recovered from the shock of his sudden appearance when the plainsman was running through the grass, seeming to sink into it. Within seconds, he had disappeared, swallowed by the grass. Holt was about to urge Abelard in pursuit, but he stopped. The arrow he had selected instantly and laid on the bowstring remained undrawn. Gorlan was also ready to shoot, his reactions every bit as sharp as Holt's. He too held his shot, looking curiously at his senior. Holt shrugged. "May mean nothing," he said. "Or maybe he's off to tell the Kalkara. But we can hardly kill him on suspicion." Gorlan let out a short bark of laughter, more to release the tension he felt as a result of the man's unexpected appearance. "I suppose there's no difference," he said, "whether we find the Kalkara or they find us." Holt's eyes fixed on him for a moment without any sign of answering humor. "Believe me, Gorlan," he said, "there's a big difference." They had abandoned the forced march pace now and walked their horses slowly through the tall grass. Behind them, the sound of the stones began to fade a little, much to Will's relief. Now, he realized, the wind was carrying it away from them. Some time passed following the sudden appearance of the plain dweller, with no further sign of life. A question had been nagging at Will all through the afternoon. "Halt," he said experimentally, not sure if Holt would order him to silence. The ranger looked at him, eyebrows raised in a sign that he was prepared to answer questions, so Will continued. "Why do you think Morgarath has enlisted the Kalkara? What does he stand to gain?" Holt realized that Gorlan was waiting for his answer as well. He marshaled his thoughts before he replied. He was a little reluctant to verbalize his thoughts, as so much of the answer depended on guesswork and intuition. "Who knows why Morgarath ever does anything?" he answered slowly. "I can't give you a definite answer. All I can tell you is what I assume. And what Crowley thinks as well." He glanced quickly at his two companions. It was obvious from their expectant expressions that they were prepared to accept his assumptions as ironclad fact. Sometimes, he thought wryly, Holt's reputation for being right all the time could be a heavy burden. "There's a war coming," he went on. "That much is already obvious. The Wargals are on the move and we've heard that Morgarath has been in contact with Ragnak." He saw the puzzled expression flit across Will's face. Gorlan, he knew, understood who Ragnak was. Ragnak is the Oberjal, or Supreme Lord, if you like, of the Scandians, the Sea Wolves. He saw the quick flash of comprehension and went on. This is obviously going to be a bigger war than we've fought before, and we're going to need all our resources. And our best commanders to lead us. I think that's what Morgorath has in mind. He's seeking to weaken us by having the Kalkara kill our leaders. Northold, the Supreme Army Commander, and Lorik, our best cavalry commander, have gone already. Certainly there will be other men who will step into those positions, but there will inevitably be some confusion in the changeover period, some loss of cohesion. I think that's what's behind Morgorath's plan. Gillan said thoughtfully, there's another aspect as well. Both those men were instrumental in his defeat last time. He's destroying our command structure and getting revenge at the same time. Holt nodded. That's true, of course. And to a twisted mind like Morgorath's, revenge is a powerful motive. So you think there'll be more killings? Will asked, and Holt met his gaze steadily. I think there'll be more attempts. Morgorath has sent 'em out twice with targets and they've succeeded. I don't see any reason why they won't go after others. Morgorath has reason to hate a lot of people in the kingdom. The king himself, perhaps. Or maybe Baron Harold, who caused Morgorath some grief in the last war. And so was Holt, Will thought with a sudden flash of fear for his teacher. He was about to voice the thought that Holt might be a target, then realized that Holt was probably well aware of the fact himself. Gillan was asking the older ranger another question. One thing I don't understand. Why do the Kalkara keep returning to their hideout? Why not just move from one victim to the next? I suppose that's one of the few advantages we do have, Holt told them. They're savage and merciless and more intelligent than Wargals. But they're not human. They are totally single-minded. Show them a victim and they'll hunt him down and kill him or die themselves in the attempt. But they can only keep track of one victim at a time. Between killings, they'll return to their lair. Then Morgorath, or one of his underlings, will prime them for the next victim and they'll head out again. Our best hope is to intercept them on the way if they've been given a new target. Or kill them in their lair if they haven't. Will looked for the 1000th time at the featureless grass plain that lay before them. Somewhere out there, the two fearsome creatures were waiting, perhaps with a new victim already in mind. Holt's voice interrupted his train of thought. Sun's going down, he said. We may as well camp here. They swung down stiffly from their saddles, easing the girths to make their horses more comfortable. That's one thing about this blasted place, Gillan said, looking around them. One spot is as good as another to camp. Or as bad. Will woke from a dreamless sleep to the touch of Holt's hand on his shoulder. He tossed back the cloak, glanced at the scudding moon overhead and frowned. He couldn't have been asleep for more than an hour. He started to say so, but Holt stopped him, placing a finger to his lips for silence. Will looked around and realized Gillan was already awake, standing above him, his head turned to the northeast, back the way they had come, listening. Will came to his feet, moving carefully to avoid making any undue noise. His hands had automatically gone to his weapons, but he relaxed as he realized there was no immediate threat. The other two were listening intently. Then Holt raised a hand and pointed to the north. There it is again, he said softly. Then Will heard it, above the moaning of the stone flutes and the soughing of the wind through the grass, and the blood froze in his veins. It was a high-pitched bestial howl that ululated and climbed in pitch. An inhuman sound carried to them on the wind from the throat of a monster. Seconds later, another howl answered the first. Slightly deeper in pitch, it seemed to come from a position a little to the left of the first. Without needing to be told, Will knew what the sounds meant. It's the Kalkara, Holt said grimly. They have a new target and they're hunting.